What is the worst HR is not your friend story that you've witnessed or experienced? So, HR hired consultants to run morale-building employee input sessions, basically saying, "We're not from the company. You can tell us all the things you don't like about working here and would like to see changed, and we'll put it into a report for management. Don't worry, everything is anonymous. We just need material for our report, and you guys get to have your say in improving things around here." Well, turns out HR and the consultants recorded all the sessions and played the highlights for management. People were disciplined for criticizing the company or their immediate superiors, and any shred of faith or trust in management that the employees may have had was instantly incinerated. Managers now complain that they don't know what's going on in their teams because nobody tells them anything. I wonder why. Story number 2. My manager at the time opened with, "Just so everyone is aware, before I start performance reviews, upper management wants me to put needs improvement for at least one field for everyone. I don't personally agree with that, so don't take it personally." And this was in a private department Slack channel, so that all my coworkers could see, but our upper management aren't in that channel. When he actually got around to the individual performance reviews and got to me, he started with, "Firstly, I've been advised to retract my statement about the mandatory needs improvement," and then he got into the review. I figured someone ratted him out. I'm really wondering who the rat was. Personally, I'd rather honesty about things like that, but I can see why HR and upline managers would not. Edit. Rest in peace my inbox. To address some common comments, yes, I'm aware there's values to such a system and that everyone has an area they can improve. I never said otherwise. I mentioned this as an example to OP's story about management getting in trouble for being honest. The part I do disagree with is that upline managers want this to be some big secret. Just tell people that everyone has improvement areas and assessments will reflect that. Yes, my manager at the time is a dope for putting that in writing. He wasn't always the most tactful, I'll say that much. No argument here from those of you saying he was dumb for doing that. To those asking what these reviews are used for, they're used for bonus calculations, promotion decisions, and deciding layoffs. At least part of the reason they insist on one improvement area is so that they can cut someone of their choosing for performance reasons if layoffs hit our area. I imagine they also use it in cases where someone is an HR issue and they need an excuse to can them. I'm aware that that's just standard corporate politics, nothing new. As for bonuses and promotions, they aren't too affected in practice unless you have multiple needs improvement areas or your improvement area is something critical to your job, because everyone has at least one. It becomes more a question of your ratings in areas critical to your job. And to people asking what my needs improvement was, every year it's always been one of the factors that's not particularly relevant to my job. I've always gotten meets and exceeds on the factors that actually matter for my day-to-day job. Story number 3. Overall, I've been able to get along with HR departments with one exception. I was working a help desk job for a company during college, and the head of HR called in for help. He was making an Excel spreadsheet and couldn't figure out how to make a formula do what he wanted. I offered to come take a look as we were in the same building, and he told me I couldn't because the spreadsheet was full of confidential information. So I asked him then if he could describe what it is exactly he was trying to do without giving away any specific info. And he told me that what he was trying to do was confidential. So I clarified that he wanted me to tell him how to do something, but I couldn't see it. And he wouldn't even tell me what it is he was trying to do. At that point, he agreed that I wouldn't be able to assist him since he couldn't divulge anything. As soon as we hung up, he called my boss to complain that I was useless. Wow, so we are already 3 stories in and I'm already hating upper management in HR. Isn't that just great? I'm lucky and thankful that I probably won't relate to many of these stories as I've never had a corporate office job, but it doesn't mean I can't offer my input and my anger. And as for the man in this story, I'd like to call him a word, but it will probably get us demonetized. I will let you fill in the blank and choose whatever pejorative you want. But anyway, next story. Story number 4. I went to HR to report that my team's manager was illegally shorting all of our paychecks. HR's response was to adopt a new company-wide policy addressing the paycheck issue and backpaying most people for a certain amount, and also to frame me for work avoidance. HR and IT disabled part of my login account to a tool we used, and then fired me a few months later after failing to fix the problem and allowing me to actually do my job. They tried to deny my unemployment claim afterwards. I told the unemployment rep that they had logs showing that I did something to break the tool I didn't even have access to break in the first place. They also didn't think to disable my email access in a timely manner, so I was able to back up all of my emails with IT documenting exactly what went down. Unemployment approved my claim and hit them with a major penalty to their insurance. Story number 5. At my last real job before striking out on my own, I had an exit interview with the HR lady, who was actually just someone who was friends with the company president who was filling in because the actual HR lady with a degree in HR and everything quit. A lot of people at this place quit. It was a terrible place to work with out-of-touch management and delusions of grandeur, limping along building websites for a business niche that was mostly old people who thought the internet was magic. During the exit interview, she asked why I was leaving. I told her I liked my coworkers a lot but hated the company. She got this exasperated look and got genuinely upset and told me that she'd been getting that same line from everybody else who quit and had their exit interview recently. It boggled my mind that they could hear the same thing over and over from so many people leaving the company and not stop to think that maybe they should change something. Story number 6. I asked my boss for a desk phone with a speakerphone function because sometimes I needed at work to conference people on the phone with people in my office. We had these old yellow phones. So he told me to make a request and CC our office manager, and he would send it to the HR department of our region via email. So I put forth a nice email outlining what I am requesting and why I need it for HR's request. My office manager replies all and asks HR, per OP's request, should I order the phone through the same channels I have used before, or is this a new policy? And the HR response is livid. She demanded to know why I needed this phone. It was in the email, and then accused my office manager of going behind HR's back and ordering phones before without approval. My office manager told my boss, who called HR and chewed her out, and I could hear yelling. My boss came out of his office and yelled at me, "See what you've caused?" He was fired up, but I know he didn't mean anything malicious by it. I just laughed. HR had to apologize to office manager for accusations. And it turns out after everybody yelled their effing lungs out for an hour, the speakerphone I needed, it was literally free and we had boxes of them in storage. I had it for a month before HR rolled out new fancy phones that were actually expensive and convoluted, required training to set up and use. At the company picnic, we had to wear effing name tags, by the way. And I had never met HR lady face to face, and she came up to me and said, "Oh, we haven't met. What's your name?" And I was trying to hide my name tag, but she read it and did not seem happy to see me. Story number 7. Pulled into a meeting with 2 HR reps in the middle of my shift, taken to this really nice boardroom, which was confusing because I was just a grunt, and this is literally floors above where I should be. They sat me down and said basically, "What do you have to say for yourself?" Me, still confused, tells them that I have no idea what they're talking about. Everyone is really quiet and serious, and I'm scared crapless, and they say, "You know what you did. This is cause for termination, blah, blah, blah." And I'm literally thinking, this is really excessive for being a few minutes late sometimes. I insist I don't know what's going on. One of them maybe realized something was wrong and flips open a file and says, "You're this person, right?" Turns out they got me mixed up with someone else who has the same name. On the elevator ride down by myself, I was still sweating. I don't know what the other person did, but man, HR does not play. Story number 8. I worked in the bakery at a Fred Meyer's for about 6 months when I was freshly 19. There was like this 45-year-old guy in the meat seafood area who was super creepy, and all of the women in my department, and even one woman who was previously in my department but was moved to another to get away from him, warned me about this man from day one. Somehow, anytime I was on my break, he would be on his break too, and he'd follow me into the break room and try to flirt with me the entire time. Not only did he follow me on my breaks and lunches, but if I had to walk to another part of the store to get anything, he would run to catch up to me and walk with me. He followed me to my car a few times after I got off shift, and the scariest time was when I was closing by myself, and he came into the back of the bakery and kept following me around the long table, trying to grab me while telling me how much he liked me and how badly he wanted to be with me. I told him no and to leave me alone constantly, while managers just shrugged and said, "That's just how he is." My boyfriend threatened him when he got off work one time. Hell, even my father came in and threatened him because no one was doing anything. The final straw for me was one night when I was closing alone again, he came into the back area and followed me into the freezer and tried to kiss me and grabbed my ass. I pushed him and effing ran to the closing manager who also functioned as HR. He said he would watch the store footage and talk to me the next day. So the next day comes and he pulls me into his office and says that he saw the video and saw that this man was stalking me inside and outside of work, and that he talked to him about his behavior, to which the man responded that it was just a misunderstanding. I replied that this had been going on for months and I wasn't going to take it anymore. And he had the effing nerve to tell me that he just does this to all the new girls. As soon as another girl gets hired, he'll leave you alone. And I told him he was a bastard and I quit on the spot. It turns out the creep was the brother of the store's owner who had been to jail in the past for SA, but was now apparently cleaning up his life. Story number 9, office survey. I put in some honest opinions of a member of my team. They were fair and honest criticisms of a system which was not working as designed. I had little contact with the system, but the whole thing seemed reasonable to me. I was, in effect, demoted for this. A position was created above me, and a colleague who was my equal was to be my manager. Position did not exist before, and this happened the same week my husband died, and the management felt like crap because of the timing. But still, on my return to work, I was basically called out for criticizing the same system in a whole company meeting, and it was explained how X system should and did work, and anyone who thought it didn't work was stupid. Cut to 2 years later. The person above me quits, partially because they're scared to tell the company that anything's gone wrong because of how I was treated, and they have to promote me to that position because it now exists according to the rules, and I'm the only one who can do it. Again, in a whole company meeting, they admit that X system isn't working, and we're having a consultation to find out why. I laughed. I couldn't help it. I had to leave the room before it turned into hysteria. Story number 10. The company I work for does anonymous surveys every year. My first 2 years, I was under this horrible manager and in a terrible department. While the surveys were anonymous, they were broken down per manager, which is fine, but my manager had 3 people under him, and it was easy to determine who was who. At a department meeting, the associate director said, "If the person who isn't happy wants to say something, now is the time, or we will just move on." 30 people were in that room, and most of them looked at me. It was so effing embarrassing. My manager used to make me use an Excel sheet to track everything I did, and he would look over it during our weekly one-on-ones, and he would often say there was 20 minutes of your day not accounted for. I was probably crapping or talking to someone, but I needed to account for every minute. He also could barely speak English and wanted me to help him and correct him. F that, that's not my job. Luckily, he was taken out of a manager position and the department was split up, and now I'm in a new role making twice as much under a manager who is amazing and understanding. Recently, I had COVID and went out. After 5 sick days, your manager needs to put in for you to get short-term disability. So I signed on the 6th day so that wouldn't happen, and I told my boss I was logged on so that wouldn't happen. And he got mad at me and said, "Don't even worry about that, I'm not reporting. If he ever leaves, I'm following him." Story number 11. One of our departments shut down at noon thanks to an HVAC issue. Building management needed to move cubicles and pull out a chunk of drop ceiling, so the manager took them all out to the bar for a team-building exercise. Well, everyone in the department arrived the next morning to a final notice in lieu of termination on their desk that cited drinking on the job and time theft. The manager had an extra special third for improper use of a company credit card, but none of what they did was against company policy. So the manager's boss, a vice president, called HR and told them to back whatever newbie had written that the hell off. HR instead forwarded over a brand new policy manual and told the VP to make sure all the write-ups were signed and returned by the end of the day. The VP goes up the chain to his boss, the CEO. The CEO hadn't even seen it, let alone authorized it. HR doesn't want to back down, even when the CEO calls them. Sure, he hadn't authorized it, but he had asked them to consider revamping it back in March. This was the glorious revamp. They'd gone back to square one and completely rewritten it. It's full of best practices, industry standard rules, and easy to understand language. Oh, and they'd been enforcing it since May, so it would probably be best for him to just sign off on it, and any concerns he found could be incorporated in a future revision. Yeah, no. The CEO didn't make it past the first page before finding a contract law violation. Page 3 had a federal labor law violation. Page 4 would make the NLRB angry, and the section on PTO would get them sued 6 ways to Sunday. The head of HR was asked to resign. When she refused, she was fired. Story number 12. Mine was a job where I was working in HR, getting screwed over by HR. I was coming into a job that I was overqualified for, but took it for the same salary as my last job because A, I hated my previous job and wanted out, and B, I really liked what the company did. Railroad industry, my dream come true. And C, because they said they couldn't offer me more, and it was already more than what they could offer. So, I was the IT guy for HR, and one day, about 7 months in, they asked me to pull a list list of everyone that left the HR department in the last year. The list only consisted of 3 people. One was my predecessor. When I pull info from their database, it automatically brings in a lot of their HR info that I'm supposed to remove prior to sending it elsewhere in the company, which includes salary. They had been paying my predecessor, who was less qualified than I was, $20K a year more than myself. I was also driving over 90 minutes to and from work every day for this job because it was a dream job of mine to work in the railroading industry. Well, I had a new job within a few weeks, only a half hour away from home. Edit. Also, the new job I got at the end did come with a pay increase. Story number 13. Coworker accidentally backed his company truck into my personal car while it was parked. He alerted me and our local manager immediately. We took photos, filed out the incident report, yada yada yada. Everyone in our office was in agreement about what happened, that it was an honest accident and the company's insurance should cover the cost of fixing my car. Then the HR director got involved. First, he tried to get me to assume liability since it was my personal vehicle that caused the accident. My car was parked in the parking lot, and I was inside at my desk when it happened. When I pointed this out, he backed down and said he would file the claim. Next, I got a call from a hostile insurance adjuster from my company's insurance demanding that I provide my insurance information or they would be pursuing legal action. It turns out the HR director had filed the claim saying that I had run into the parked work truck with my car and tried to flee the scene, but was witnessed by a coworker who reported me. I informed the adjuster about what had actually happened and emailed her the photos and signed incident reports and witness statements that we had filled out, and she changed her tune pretty quickly and said she would get back to me. The next day, I get a settlement agreement from HR asking me to accept $1,100 for repairs and to sign a form releasing the company from any further responsibility. I had only just dropped my car after the body shop and hadn't even gotten the estimate back yet. I declined and was told that either I had to accept their offer or be out of luck. At this point, I reached out to my own insurance and told them what had happened. As I went through the sequence of events, I could hear my agent getting almost giddy about all the blatantly illegal tactics that HR had tried on me. In the end, they processed my claim and pursued my own company's insurance through subrogation. He also mentioned that they would probably be seeking additional damages due to falsification of statements in the initial claim. Yeah, don't F with USAA. In the end, the damage ended up costing over $4,000 to fix, but I didn't have to pay a cent, not even my deductible. I don't know if the HR director experienced any consequences, but there was a comment in our finance VP's year-end report about needing to reduce extraneous costs due to reporting delays and inaccuracies in liability claims. So, as I've mentioned before, I've never had a corporate job, but I read the comments all the time. Someone please tell me, what is it about HR that just attracts idiots? Like, yes, they're kind of horrible people, but they're just idiots. Like, what about this position attracts these vermin, these leeches, these scum, these League of Legend playing losers? HR disgusts me. I'm sure there's good HR out there, but I've never heard a good story about them. Anyway, next story. Story number 14. I've been an exec at several large companies, and I am super disappointed to see that it's usually nothing more than the ass-covering department. It could be one of the best roles ever. Let's create the greatest culture and attract the best people, making this such a fun, rewarding, challenging place to be with loads of development opportunities, support, coaching, and all the trimmings. Let's recognize that a company is really its people, so let's create fertile soil for them to grow and feel fulfilled and therefore be the greatest evangelists for the company because it's legitimately awesome. No, F you. We're here for the sole purpose of making sure you don't sue the company and that when you want to leave, we've got enough data and leverage to make sure you go without a fuss. Bunch of bastards. They could have made it beautiful, but no. They make it out of crap, gravel, and corn. Story number 15. Not as bad as many of you people, but still pissed me off. I'm over IT, and I put in long hours, weekend work, etc. regularly. I've been here for over 10 years and basically rebuilt their entire operation properly from the ground up. Monday was a staff meeting that ran 3 hours in a hot room, and I went to sleep during a particularly boring rant by the legal department head about how overworked they are. I got called into HR over this. First time in 30 plus years of employment. They lectured me about commitments to work and had the nerve to warn me about, we fire people for sleeping on the job. Yes, we fire nurses who sleep on the night shift without monitoring their patients, not staffers who drift off in a status meeting, particularly after finishing a 90-hour work week and operating on a couple of hours of sleep. Apparently, the only reason they were up in arms is that the legal person complained about not having my attention in a critical staff update to her friend, the CEO. That was 2 years ago, and I'm still not over it. Every time a recruiter calls me and I'm tempted to dodge them, that incident comes to mind. Story number 16. One coworker is known to be a general F-up. She would generally hide it by being nice and on every social committee, and she recently changed departments for a promotion. Her manager would cover up her crappy work because of fear of during someone on the same committee as he and legal, or dump it back on us. When the manager tried to transfer her back, the head of her previous department works for legal and spoke glowingly of her and wouldn't take her back, so her manager quit for another job. Well, the new manager was also promoted from another department. Got it apparently by saving the company a lot of money, cutting useless crap in his department, and is all about processes that leads to results. He doesn't give a crap about typical work hours. You can set your own schedule just as long as things work, and if it doesn't work, he needs an explanation of why it doesn't so he can help fix it. There is a rumor that he's autistic or something because he's really unflappable and believes people when they tell him about things, to a fault. Now, she just wasn't doing any work, and the work was terrible and full of errors. So he asked her what was going on. She said she didn't have time in her day to do the work as there was too much and she never had any training. So he had pulled her from 3 social committees, hired a temp for 4 weeks and got them both training, and took the training too. But the F-up woman complained to HR about him to HR. So HR went to write him up for a poisoned work environment. He showed them the email where she basically was working on social committees for 5 hours a week, and she was behind in her work. So he hired a temp, got everyone trained, and the temp, who had less education than him and the F-up lady, was doing better than his staff, and asked for his budget to be increased so he could have a part-time worker if she was truly needed. So now HR is ducking her calls. They don't want to tell her that she's an F-up because they like her, but this weird dude is doing weird paperwork that's really well documented that she just can't do her job, and someone worth less experience is doing better than her. They just went out of it. But the F-up woman is not having any of that. She starts hanging out on coffee breaks with the HR VP and her previous department head about how she is a nervous wreck, how she hasn't had any training and more. And both these management types know that she has had training and are getting really sick of her complaining all the time. And that's when HR flipped out. They got her pamphlets on the benefits package outlining the help and psychiatric line and stopped hanging out with her. She tried applying for a job in her old department, but they didn't want her. She was telling everyone her situation and how unfair it was. Then the F-up woman really effed up. There was an anonymous employee survey. Everyone in her department stated they were pretty happy, except her. She thought it would be clever to say that the management team in her department were racist to mess her boss's reputation, but he's multiracial. And the 2 other managers on her team are all people of color, but her VP is whiter than bread, and she took the racist accusation to think it was referring to her. And everyone in the department knew who was miserable because the effed up woman told everyone. Plus, HR and the VP's bonus is tied to employees' scores, so she just effed them out of their bonuses. Things got ugly after that. She got escorted out of the building. All this because she didn't want to do her work, thought HR was her friend, and when they weren't, doubled down claiming she was experiencing racism. It was bonkers. Story number 17. I worked for a company for 4 years. About 3 years in, they hired a new head of HR who was a total B-word. She would hardly speak to anyone who wasn't on the management team and treated everyone else in the company with contempt. A colleague of mine, who today is my boss, gave notice because he was offered a better salary from one of the competitors. On his last day, the HR lady basically tried to force him to sign a contract saying that he was giving up his right to sue the company for any outstanding pay or bonus. Of course, he didn't sign, but the HR lady would not take no for an answer and kept hounding him. I gave a notice a few months later and she tried the same bullcrap with me. Having been warned by my buddy, I did the same thing. I returned all the company property, laptop, office keys, etc., and had them sign the receipt that they received everything. But I refused to sign the agreement that I gave up the right to take them to court if they try to screw me. The company we work for today is very different. First off, my buddy is a C-level executive there, and I report straight to him, so we're both very high up in the corporate organization. The HR people there are excellent in this company, helpful, friendly, and most importantly, competent. Story number 18. I worked in a warehouse that regularly concealed the shipping of dangerous goods to save money. This went on for years. As time went on, I bubbled up through the ranks and was eventually made manager of the warehouse. I outright refused to ship anything anywhere until we started to claim our dangerous goods shipments properly. Their solution? Their boss started to sign his name instead. This went on for a few weeks until HR found out. They obviously knew how much trouble the president could have gotten into, so the next time a shipment had to go out, they got the newest guy in the the warehouse to start signing his name instead, claiming they were training him how to do paperwork, but the poor kid had no idea. So when the driver showed up to pick up his shipment, I told him that there was a bunch of dangerous substances concealed in the shipment. So he refused it and left. I got told later that my actions were damaging to the company image, and it had to stop. I told HR exactly what was going on and how I would not be a part of it. Less than a week after that, I was removed from my position due to company restructuring and laid off. Some of the most crooked crap I've ever seen. My rough estimates ballpark the money that they saved is about $250,000 a year. Scumbags. The whole family. Story number 19. Long-time grudge. Late December back in '99. Everyone was preparing for the Millennium Bug. As HP UX system admin, and because I worked the closet, I was asked to go into the office after midnight and run a few tests. It didn't bother me because I don't drink and generally didn't go overboard for New Year celebrations. If everything was good, it would take half an hour. I would send a few paper messages and go home. 1 hour at most, including traveling. If things went bad, I would be calling anyone and everyone to pass the problem to someone else. So, for the inconvenience, my CTO offered minimum 6 hours overtime at 2.5 times pay rate. We had heard of people getting paid money for working the Millennium, but this sounded like a fine deal to me. Everything went smoothly, and I was back home by 1:30 a.m. Then, in January, it came time to claim. It got through my department manager, but was kicked back by HR. Their view was that because I had the on-call pager that week, I was entitled to claim the normal, very small pager rate and call-out rate for the hour worked. It took a couple of months, and according to my manager, the CTO had to have a quiet work with the head of HR and asked her exactly what she was doing during her New Year celebration. But I got my money. Story number 20. I was diagnosed with severe depression, which had been affecting my work. My boss was really cool and she was aware of the situation and was trying to help me out the best she could. While I was getting my dosage figured out, she suggested a paid medical leave of absence so I could focus on my mental health and getting back into a better routine, and talk to HR to get it started. HR was nice about it, gave me all the info, and then laid me off a week or two later. This was a month before the pandemic started, so I'm still unemployed. And yes, I know this is illegal. However, I consulted a lawyer and there was not enough written proof on either side, so HR would be able to claim that they had no idea and I wouldn't be able to prove them wrong enough for it to matter. Also, they technically didn't fire me. They instead offered me a good severance package for agreeing to never sue them. Or I could stay and keep my job, but would be put on an altered work schedule. The new schedule was that my next year plus worth of work had to be 100% done within 2 months, or else I would be fired with no severance package. The kicker is that by the time I actually decided to talk to HR about the medical leave, it was a couple of months after my boss suggested it, and my doctor had already tweaked the dosage a couple of times. I tried to power through because I liked my job and was slammed, but eventually felt like my rock bottom was digging itself a hole. But the day they laid me off was my most productive day in years. I was finally on the right dosage and it was working so damn well. But obviously, I took the severance package. F that place. Story number 21. I was promoted from employee to manager. A month later, one of my colleagues decided to hit on me. I'm male, she's female, and a few years younger than me. Despite now being her boss, she decides she won't accept no for an answer. At first, she maintains I'm clearly interested in her and just being difficult because of the work setting, ignoring that I had a girlfriend at the time as well. Then, her performance review comes around, and she does pretty well, but a couple of areas need improvement compared to the rest of the team. I'm happy to help her on that so she can be a top performer by year's end. She lost her crap. The story changes. She decides that I'm punishing her because I can't be with her. She starts to refuse any coaching or constructive criticism, badmouths me to colleagues and clients, insists I should just get over myself and date her like we both want, and I continue to reject her advances. HR gets involved, and despite everything being documented and numerous people supporting me, they put me on notice to play nice with her. She is a spoiled rich kid with an insurance lawyer father, so HR makes the decision that the company can't waste the time or money in legal troubles she would create if she was fired. Even with 90% certainty anything she dumped on us would be dismissed in the end. Eventually, she decides she just doesn't want to be with me anymore and I'm just a terrible boss who hates her because she won't date me. Again, I've been rejecting her for months at this point. Her behavior gets worse, and I have another manager assigned to literally relay instructions to her. She will flip her crap at anything I say, tells HR I'm not emotional enough when I communicate, or too emotional, or not clear, or too clear, and it feels harsh, whatever. If someone else gives her my advice, verbatim repeat of what I said, then she has no objections. Then, a year and a half later, I got promoted again. Spoilers, I was not a terrible manager after all, and thankfully I moved to a new team. I have a lot of bitterness towards HR types for making me endure that brat for so long. I had an 18-month sexual harassment and insubordination headache, all because she might have moved that harassment to the company if we formally disciplined her, let alone fired her. HR will always put the company over you. Story number 22. I work in biotech, and until a few days ago, we were allowed to have an alcoholic beverage at lunchtime unless you were handling something dangerous. My workmate, principal scientist, essentially a lab consultant manager, and colleague finished for the day at 1 p.m., as it is biologics and cells dictating when we need to work. So they went to the pub across the road before going home, and HR clocked them for having a pint. On Monday, they were taken into disciplinary without asking what happened first. They got told in the meeting that they were getting a warning, assuming it's a verbal warning as they're good employees, despite them saying that they had finished for the day. Then, it got retracted when the clock-in, clock-out information was shown a week later. Afterwards, a lot of us went to the pub at lunchtime and just drank rum and coke instead, despite HR. Then, this one day, we clocked said HR person drinking wine, so someone I work with went to her boss with photographic evidence. Nothing happened that we know of, although it would be bad management if we all knew that she had been disciplined, and I argue that if she had been caught, we would have had a company email reminding us we can't have a drink at lunchtime. Story number 23. Wally World. I got sick for 3 days and got a doctor's note explaining why I was gone. I went into HR and explained that at the time I didn't have a primary doctor as I had just gotten on health insurance from the company. Without a primary doctor, I couldn't fill out the leave paperwork and asked for help. HR told me not to worry about it and to just let the claim be rejected so that they could manually approve it. I made sure to give the doctor's note to HR, but sadly didn't keep a copy for myself. Missing, though, 3 days brought me over the point policy for attendance. But HR waited 2.5 months before firing me, only a week before one of those points would have rolled off, bringing me back in line with the policy. It also managed to screw me out of my raise. I asked HR if there was any way to stop this and fix what was going on, almost begging for the job back, only to be told to ask the store manager, who they left out had retired and was no longer with the company. I was told by HR that they never said they could help me about the points and paperwork, and that I had never given them any information about any problems as I was being fired. This all came to a head when I filed for unemployment. HR tried to deny the claim and ended up in a 3-way call with me, a member of my state's unemployment office, and HR. After the member heard my side and then HR's side, he started to pick at HR's story. The 2.5 months after policy break for attendance, coupled with a copy of that note that I went back to the doctor for a second one, backfired on HR and had the state watching them. Plus, Wally World was ordered to pay for my unemployment. Got a better paying job now, but F that HR lady for being a two-faced B-word. So, one thing I'm learning about HR is that you should probably just record every interaction you can with them if possible, and just make sure they write everything down and be like, hey, thanks for the kind act of generosity. Can you put that down in writing? Because I don't trust you sexist mother freaking sons of... Ugh. Anyway, let's continue. Next story. Story number 24. I worked in a very toxic environment once where the department manager, my team manager, and the HR lady ran the show and made everyone miserable. We were called in to get lectured for pretty much anything. Conversations were listened to during our breaks, etc. Once I was homesick with the flu and high fever. My phone rang. It was my team manager. Didn't take it. She then proceeds to send me a bunch of text messages and calls me non-stop because she couldn't find a document on the server and had to answer my phone now. Tired of the situation, I answered the phone and just had to explain her how to navigate on Explorer, basically. I was furious. Back to work, I got to the HR just asking if this is normal to be almost harassed on my private number during my medical illness, receiving text messages, etc. The HR lady says she's going to talk to my manager. She must have lied a bunch during this interview because the next thing you know, I'm called in again and it starts getting weird. HR lady is insinuating that I have personal mental health issues that makes me say bad things about my manager, and that it's because I hate myself and that I'm mean to others and all kinds of BS. And then I start crying from rage because I feel trapped there and proceed to walk to the door to exit this weird session. And then the HR lady screams in my face saying, "How dare you leave? This is not over. You have no right to leave now. I'm not finished. If you walk through that door, you're done here. Close that door." I panicked and I stayed in her office, terrified by her. I got lectured on my pretending mental health problems for another 20 minutes. After that episode, I called the state office for labor protection, etc., and told them on the phone what had happened. They were shocked. I quit the company soon after and left it at that. Another one of my ex-colleagues experiences the same thing and then goes to the labor office to tell them what is going on. Some years later, we happened to discover that they were under investigation for mobbing because too many people had complained. Guess what? They fired the HR lady, blaming it all on her, saying she was unstable. Karma. Story number 25. I worked IT support at a small PI and MM law firm. About 25 people, where HR were the office managers. For the last 3 years, I was one of their favorite employees. I was the type to always want to go above and beyond. Not that I was perfect in any way, but I showed up on time, did my work consistently, didn't complain too much, and got along with everyone. But I did have a bad habit of ending up the employee rep when it came to certain issues, like the absence of a healthcare plan and a case of sexual harassment between a department head and an intern. She quit due to the lack of response from management. I came in as a file clerk and worked my way to IT. I liked my job. Sure, it didn't pay the best, but it was consistent and I was always learning something new. I was an official employee, whereas the IT head was an independent contractor who came into the office once or twice a month to check up on my work. The Friday before lockdowns began, I called the manager to ask if they had a plan on how to work from home, provided a lockdown was announced. And she didn't have one. So she called the head attorney to ask, told him it was me asking, and he got pissed off. He came to my little corner office and told me I was acting scared and irrational, and there's no way we're getting locked down. Strike one. He was a workaholic, so the idea of not coming into the office was a nightmare to him, so I shrugged it off and let it go. Later on, my coworker suggested a bottom-of-the-barrel least-you-can-do list of COVID protocols, and wanted some of us to review and sign off on it before presenting it. I did, as well as the receptionist and a few others. After getting our signatures, she went into the office to present it to the bosses. The meeting with the head attorney and the office managers went horribly, and what I was told was a pretty heated exchange. She mentioned me as one of the people who reviewed it and recommended it. Strike two, I guess? So I got called into the office to be reprimanded. My boss was in serious denial about the potential lockdown and thought the list of protocols was fear-mongering and threatened to fire me for co-signing. Told me I was lucky to be working. Well, literally an hour before clock-out time, our mayor announces the lockdown. Suddenly, the whole management and HR team is struggling to come up with a plan for lockdown. My boss calls us all into the conference room and offers everyone a beer and attempted to shoot the breeze. Pandemic schmandemic. He didn't know what to do. The head IT called in and laid out a blueprint based on what his other firms were doing, and we discussed some work that I could do for the foreseeable future. So I spent the first 2 days working at home just doing whatever grunt work I could virtually, but I knew the end was nigh. Then I got a call at 10 a.m. Wednesday morning. HR told me I needed to start coming into the office despite lockdown orders, because this pandemic is only going to last like a few weeks anyway, and I was their essential worker. I had my reasons for not wanting to, among those being the hour-plus subway commute and my living situation. I had more than just myself to consider, and at the salary I was making and with no healthcare at the time, it did not seem worth it. This was before stimulus was being talked about. After making it clear I couldn't budge, I told them I understood the situation they were in and that whatever they needed to do would be fine. Because I'd been pretty dependable before, they weren't expecting that response and it really angered them. So midway through us discussing whatever kind of severance they could offer, which was 2 weeks of PTO that I earned, they lied about it when I asked before and hid from our employee account to deter us from requesting vacation time, and they started structuring the narrative to make it sound like I was being negligent and ungrateful. So they terminated me, of course, technically illegally, but summarized my termination as, "This employee was difficult to work with." I believe they thought by the time my PTO ran out, the world would be back to normal, and they'd be back in the office, and I'd come begging. Little did they know. Midway through the pandemic, I started getting freelance work as a video editor, and I have enough consistent gigs that I make a good living now. I'm much happier now than I was there. The firm did start blowing up my phone again around August, but I blocked their numbers. I'd ignored a lot of BS because I valued a stable job above all else. Truth be told, I was never going to quit. Looks like getting fired was what I needed. Story number 26. We had an anonymous survey to fill out on the company, department, and managers. I hated the company and my department, but needed the job at that moment. I was very suspicious about it being truly anonymous, so I gave average responses, nothing too negative or too positive. The department was full of cheerleaders that always claimed it was the best company ever and how great our managers were. It felt like I was alone in hating it, and I thought my negative responses would make me stand out against the grain. In the end, the anonymous survey showed that our department ranked lowest in the company in terms of employee satisfaction, and our managers also received the lowest ranking out of all managers in the company. All these cheerleaders secretly hated the company as much as I did, but only expressed it when they thought they were anonymous. Rather than change the management, a few weeks in, they started firing employees one after the other. I somehow survived the firing, and I am certain it was because of my very careful diplomatic responses. I quit sometime later, and they were very surprised because they thought I was satisfied with the work culture and my job. Yeah, anonymous indeed. Story number 27. In a company I worked at, 3 guys were fired for allegations of sexual misconduct. One wasn't even in the country at the time the incident was said to have happened. 2 others were in a different department and never even knew who the woman was. So, the company and he decided that firing them and then doing an investigation was less damaging long term. It turns out that she had tried to match with these guys on Tinder and they didn't match with her, so she thought she'd get her own back. One guy immediately got another job and the other 2 sued the company and nearly destroyed it. She got fired and the company refused to give her a reference. All 3 now are working for different companies, and the sad thing is, these guys were very important to the company and had worked there for years and in totally different departments to the woman making the claim, so even a cursory glance would have said something was wrong. It took about 2 years to sort the whole mess out, and about half a day to conduct the investigation and find out that she acted out of malice. The manager for the HR department was let go, along with a bunch of staff who were female who showed that they held certain beliefs that would immediately see any man as a predator regardless of the truth. Story number 28. This happened a couple of years ago, but still makes my blood boil whenever I think about it. My husband received a call from his sister. She was 22 weeks pregnant, but due to complications, the baby had passed away. The funeral was on Saturday. So I called my work as I had a shift scheduled for Saturday. I worked in a nursing home at the time. I briefly explained the situation and said that I wasn't requiring paid bereavement, although it would be nice. Even just an unpaid personal leave day would suffice. The scheduling department told me that a niece or nephew passing away allows for 1 paid day off for the funeral. Sounds good to me. A couple days before the funeral, I get another call from work. After discussing the unique situation amongst themselves, management had decided that because the baby wasn't fully formed, it would not count as a paid bereavement day. I was absolutely floored. I told everyone at work what had happened, and they were upset and disgusted. Word got back to management that I was upset, leading to the director telling me I was now going to be paid for the bereavement day, but also warned that this sort of thing shouldn't be broadcasted throughout the office. Needless to say, F that. If you don't want people to know you treat me crappy, then don't treat me crappy. So, this might be one of the more evil stories that I read. My blood is boiling slightly. Oh my God, wow, this really pisses me off. What is it with management and HR? Power, it just corrupts and turns people into a-holes, or enables them to be the a-holes they already were. With the exception of Captain Steve Rogers, but everybody else, yeah, Zemo was right. Anyway, next story. Story number 29. I got hired on at a company after getting laid off from my previous job, doing work at a tier lower than what I was doing. I only had about 2 years experience working at that tier, so it was going to be, let's see how you perform before we put you at that level sort of thing. That's fine with me. I can prove myself easily, and I've done it multiple times before, and the company is rapidly expanding. At this point, I've been working there for about 6 months. I've been hustling and putting my nose to the grindstone, showing up early, hitting every deadline, and being well respected and liked by my coworkers. I barely see my main supervisor, and when I do, he is very distant and is not very approachable. So the job I really want starts to open up due to the expansion. I ask my main supervisor for a meeting about filling one of the positions. I asked very professionally about our agreement when hired about moving up of that may happen anytime soon. He scoffed and said that we never made such agreement and that he didn't trust me. I was in pure shock as I saw this guy lying through his teeth. Thankfully, this was a written statement agreement upon hire, and I brought this to the attention of HR. The only thing that wasn't clear was length of time after hire would I be considered moving up. We had a sit-down meeting where I brought a copy of the agreement. They essentially said that I need to build their trust trust first, and I was still confused, even when I brought up my work performance. I then tried explaining how they were starting to lose my trust and confidence in their leadership. Their response was, "You have to trust us." No, I absolutely effing do not. After the meeting, I started looking for work elsewhere, while barely doing what was needed for my current job. Found a job that paid so much more and was the job I was going for. I didn't even leave a 2 weeks notice. I just walked up to the HR person, dropped my work badge off at the desk, and said, "I'm not coming back." Someone who refuses to listen to me and berate me while telling me that I have to trust them doesn't get my trust or respect. Story number 30. I worked at a company where the HR director was friends with the accounting director, but nobody knew it. She had hired him when the position was opened, since his boss did not work in our office. They trusted her to hire this guy. He was qualified, but he eventually started to sexually harass almost all of the women that worked for him. Our accounting department had all of the best-looking women too. One of the women went to HR to complain. She was threatened to not mention it again, or the HR director would call her husband up and tell him that his wife was cheating on him. She was screwing a guy at our office, and a few weeks later, this lady quit. Then later, another woman went to complain, and nothing was done. HR didn't have anything to threaten her with, but HR told her boss about it, and he tried to make her job a living hell. A few weeks later, our CEO came into our office for a few weeks. All of the women in our accounting department went to him to let him know what was happening. He fired the HR director and the accounting director that same day. We then had a big company-wide meeting where he told us what happened. After the meeting, several other women from other different departments came up to him to tell him that they were also harassed and were afraid to go to HR. The great thing is that the HR lady was so disliked even before this that she applied at another company that we worked with. One of my friends who also used to work at my company worked at that company. The owner went to him and asked him about her as she was coming in that day for an interview. He told his boss not to hire her because she was one of the worst HR people he had ever worked with. He had issues with her prior, and he made sure that she saw him after the interview. She wasn't hired. Story number 31. New upper management came in. There was one mandatory meeting for all employees. Usually, mandatory meetings are held more than once so that everyone from every shift and department had a chance to attend. We were told to bring our cell phones to the meeting. Rumors were running wild that they were going to search our phones or something. When we got there were instructions on the whiteboard on how to log into a particular website and take a survey. And the survey topic? How great it was to work there. We were told it was anonymous, and to be honest, but you used your employee ID number to log in, and management walked around looking over people's shoulders as they filled it out. Not surprisingly, there were soon posters everywhere bragging about how we were number 3 in the state or something in our industry for best places to work or some crap. Rumor was upper management got hefty bonuses as a reward. Us peasants on the floor were still poorly trained, short-staffed, bullied by middle management, and constantly out of the supplies needed to do our jobs. Story number 32. 2019. Over the weekend, I went to Belgium. On Wednesday, I was supposed to work. I work as a chef, but unfortunately, Monday night, I came down with a fever and general crappiness. I managed to make it back to Germany and went straight to a doctor who signed me off sick for the rest of the week. While lying in bed crook, I decided to post the pictures of the trip. Well, some snitching colleagues saw it and showed the higher-ups. It scaled all the way up to HR, and they asked me to come in. I'd been previously in contact with them about asking for a new uniform, so attending thinking that's what it was about. But no, she chewed me out in the most condescending voice and did not believe me when I told her that those pictures were taken on the weekend. I was in complete shock and couldn't think straight. I insisted again and again that it was on the weekend, but she gave me a condescending look and was like, but if you register as sick and then just go on holidays, that's illegal. She wasn't listening to me at all. I left the meeting still employed and cried in the bathroom for 15 minutes or so. I was also furious at that colleague, who I still don't know who that was, who snitched after seeing a post and didn't ask me about it first. It completely changed how I viewed everyone, and I swiftly deleted them all from my social media. After calming down and talking with my parents about it, I was able to take a screenshot of the metadata of the photo that proved it was taken on the weekend, when I had every right to be wherever I wanted to be. I sent that with a surprisingly politely worded email to prove my innocence. Nothing else ever came of it, but it thoroughly shook my trust in the leadership and how I thought they would approach matters. In all honesty, my direct boss, the head chef, should have dealt with me directly, but he told me later that although he was made aware of the situation, he didn't give a crap about it, so allowed it to be escalated. God, that guy was a jerk. Story number 32. My dad and I worked at the same company when I was around 20. The HR lady was pretty terrible to him and to anyone not in her clique, but she was extra terrible to him and also to me after he died. I could name at least 10 times when she basically punished him for being older, not understanding how to use things on the computer, etc. But I think the worst thing she did to me was after he passed away. One of the senior buyers had always leered at me and made me uncomfortable, but after my dad died, he started to actively harass me. I didn't go to her because she was horrible, but I was kind of scared at how he would corner me in the lunchroom, physically bump into me in the hall with no reason, etc. So I told one of my dad's friends, and he told the guy to back off. A few days later, I got called into HR and written up for harassment. She said I was trying to incite workplace violence and that my behavior made that man feel threatened. Story number 33. This one's a quick one, but it still pisses me off. I was switching jobs after working for this one hospital for 3 years. I have a type 1 diabetic son, and the insurance I had at this hospital was really good, and I was leaving at the beginning of December. The benefits person reassured me that I would have coverage that lasted the rest of the year, all the way through December. So his specialist visit was early in December, and we planned to get another round of his supplies before the end of it too. The thing was, no coverage. Ended somehow before I even left the company on November 30th. My quit date was December 4th. Already ended up going to the specialist who had to back charge us a ton and then paying out of pocket for his insulin because it's not like we can go without it until January. I sent an email thanking her for putting a huge unexpected strain right before Christmas too. It was a bit over $1,000 in charges that would have been covered too that I had to get all of a sudden. And of course, now that I wasn't a part of the company, they weren't going to try and help me at all. Story number 34. Worked in management for social services at a DHS shelter in New York City. My direct supervisor made multiple complaints to HR and they never got back to her with a resolution regarding our abusive program director, her direct supervisor. She made a complaint to HR again regarding the project manager who failed to handle the situation between the PD and my supervisor because they directed him to make a resolution. He fails to do so. The PD is and was cool with me because she was my PD at another job and hired me again. She told me the PM knew about the complaint my supervisor made about him from HR. Both supervisor and myself was terminated because of another reason, and I'm happy I'm not there. Very toxic environment. HR there took weeks to get back to my supervisor, and she had to trail them daily to get an answer on a resolution between the PD and her. Some of the issues included the PD speaking down to her during every conversation, not answering any of her questions and doing so with questions to her questions, or making comments on why she doesn't know something. You couldn't ask her for any direction because she wasn't a leader. She was very young and controversial. There were about 1 million things wrong about the leadership there. It was very corrupt. All in all, it took over 1.5 months to hire someone, and we were extremely understaffed. A candidate we approved for hiring called us crying because the HR person in charge of onboarding her made her cry. I was working 120 plus hours bi-weekly. I would be at work from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. daily. The workplace culture was absolutely terrible. We had employees making HR complaints and statements against each other to get each other fired or suspended just because they didn't get along. It gave me PTSD, and I'm looking to change fields because of this. The shelter system in New York City needs dire help, but the toxic people placed in positions to change lives are destroying them with the hardworking, motivated employees remaining. It's a dying place to work, and I fear not enough people will remain to service the homeless. They're the ones losing. Edit. One of my case managers, her 2-year-old, caught cancer, leukemia, and she had to take a leave of absence. They never got back to her until she started to make threats. She was a colleague of mine from a former job, and because of them not responding for over a month, her taking matters into her own hands made them have ill feelings towards me because she was my referral. Edit number 2. This PD was fired once from this company before for sexual misconduct. The rumor is her and the PM are in bed together, and I believe it. Story number 35. I was at a firm that had a huge employment law team for 12 years before going in-house. I have horror stories for days. Likewise, I actually had my incident not long ago. New employee, 22 or 23 years old, just graduated from a top East Coast all-girls school. She was good with spreadsheets and project management. This was her first real job. One morning, she drops by my office and she's wearing new glasses. And I say sincerely, "I like your glasses. They make you look studious." She laughed, made some insecure comment, and scurried away. Sure as crap, HR calls me in the next day to say that she went to them and said my comment made her feel objectified and uncomfortable. We both knew it was bullcrap from a snowflake, but also we knew we would need to go through the motions of taking it seriously. I never trusted her again, and now just avoid contact with any of these ticking time bombs. She had some conflict with the female attorneys in our group and has since transferred out. My advice, coming from someone who has litigated this stuff, always remember that HR isn't there to protect you. They are there to protect the company from you. It's really that simple. Story number 37. My first real job landed me in HR. I did training for the company, but am definitely not an HR type. It was 5 years of pain. And I don't say this lightly, but my boss was a twat. First, early 90s company surveys were color-coded. Employees said they would not be tracked. Surprise! Second, my manager was the HR manager. She wasn't my boss, though. She started dating a team leader who came to our state for a job. He left his wife and 2 girls back in another state, eventually divorced her. Eventually, he was promoted all the way to production manager while still dating the HR manager. Both idiots. When upper management found out, they told them one had to go, and she was indignant and pissed off. Idiots. And third, and the one that is just crappy, her brother died from an OD, so they killed his cat to say that they could bury the cat with the brother. Absolute twat. Story number 38. Oh, I've been waiting for the chance to share this answer. I worked in a private school where HR was basically a means for senior management to get rid of people whose faces no longer fit. A school nurse who raised some complaints when a government inspector came in was fired for misconduct and is now making beds and cleaning in a crappy B&B because that was the only work she was able to get. And 2 male teachers were dismissed on separate occasions for the same reason. Strangely enough, they were both gay. My own experience occurred when I acquired a new line manager who I knew I was not going to get on with. I went to HR and requested to be transferred to another department, which could have easily been done, but I was refused. Over the next year and a half, my line manager proceeded to bully and gaslight until my work started to suffer and I was threatened with a capability hearing. I quit before they could fire me for good old misconduct, and I moved halfway across the country and I am now existing barely on government benefits and antidepressants. Story number 39. I've never been particularly trusting of HR, but my last job was the worst. I worked in a shop as a part of a small local company, and I absolutely loved it. It used to be very close-knit and friendly, and the head of office staff were very approachable in the beginning. I guess they are nice if you don't have any problems. I am mildly disabled, but only started having symptoms of my issues in the last few years. It took a few years of testing to determine what was actually wrong, and even now, 2.5 years out of this job, I'm still learning my limits and triggers. So there I was at this shop job as a supervisor, working my butt off and proud to do so, but depending on various factors, I would suddenly be at risk to collapse. I would later develop severe joint pain too. I endured through 2 different managers who were very supportive, but the third decided to get HR involved. They requested a copy of my medical records, which made me feel uneasy. It was supposed to be for a health and safety appraisal to determine whether or not I required extra support. No appraisal was ever done. Now, I will say that I had been an utterly loyal employee. I loved that company. I had been a brand ambassador, ran the shop without managerial assistance at times, and ran private events for the company too. But something changed in my last 6 months at that job. Long story short, manager went AWOL for a week. Assistant manager was running another big annual staff event off-site, and I was running the shop when my condition flared up. I couldn't call in sick. There was literally no one to cover for me. I relied on a walking stick to even stand. I made the decision to sit in a chair behind the counter as I was in such a bad way. It just so happened to be the day one of the co-founders came into the shop. She had always been so nice and friendly before, but I saw her frown at the sight of me. After the manager returned, I was told that boss lady and the HR wanted a meeting with me. I was bricking it, but my family assured me that I couldn't be in trouble because that would be discrimination. And to be brutally honest, if our manager hadn't effed off for a week for unapproved leave, which was not for bereavement, but because she thought she would get a chance to be on television, we wouldn't have been left in the lurch. Well, my boss lady didn't attend the meeting, but HR were relentless. They first accused me of making the company look bad by sitting in the chair and by even using my walking stick. Apparently, a regular saw me using the stick in public and came in to ask if I was alright, and they didn't like that either. They accused me of not pulling my weight for months, first time it had ever been mentioned, and they said I shouldn't have agreed to the shifts if I was going to be ill, which I had no way of knowing would happen. It was only then when they had reduced me to tears that they started playing nice and saying, "You're working too hard, you're doing too much by yourself, you need support." What a contradicting to "you're not working hard enough," and they dressed this up as support and caring. I was demoted from supervisor to a regular assistant. which meant a hefty pay cut and shift reduction. I relied on overtime to get by. Within a month, I found a disabled-friendly job and left. It's not even the end of the story, though. I decided to leave on a high note. I mean, I knew full well HR had bullied me and pushed me into a constructive dismissal, but I had truly loved that job and company. I wrote a really nice goodbye letter, and then the whiny boss lady told my old team I had accused them of bullying me. I mean, sure, HR and head office had treated me disgracefully, but I didn't even complain about them. My team were completely innocent, but it was the boss's word against mine, and they all shunned me. As for now, I'm doing much better now. I actually have a harder job in some ways, but I'm handled and looked after by my colleagues, who have known since day one what support I need. I love this job. My condition is functional neurological disorder presenting as CFS and fibromyalgia, by the way. I'm basically in some sort of pain every day and prone to fatigue. I've only had 3 days of sickness regarding to my condition in the 2.5 years I've been at this job. While I didn't take many sick days at my old job, a collapse could happen as often as once a month if we weren't careful. I would have considered legal action for my old job, but believe it or not, that B-word is also a lawyer. I'm trying to draw a line under the whole thing. The way things played out still hurts, though. I don't think I will ever treat a HR department ever again. Story number 40. I've heard so many HR horror stories, but I've never had to deal with anything too bad from them. I used to work in a call center, and it came up that the company's PR lady was going on maternity leave. They were going to need someone to temporarily help out. I pounced on it because I was getting my minor in PR at the time, and it could get me internship credit at university, and I was already well known for helping out the site director when his admin was out. And then boom, the position went to another young lady who had no qualifications, but did have some other things going on in her favor. I went to HR to find out what was going on, as I didn't even have the opportunity to officially say I was interested, and I was given all the fairly stupid reasons why she had gotten it. I was so pissed. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and pulled up a video from our last sales award celebration. And I said, could this have anything to do with it? Because I had accidentally caught the other young lady giving a through-the-pants hand job to one of our married associate directors. I knew it would eventually come in handy, but I never imagined I would be showing it to the kind of scary director of HR. Magically, she and I both got the internship, and it was paid, of course. Okay, so let's walk through this lady's plan of attack here. She decided to publicly, with a married official, a supervisor, give him an over-the-pants handy in public where there are cameras and people and coworkers. What plan is this? This is a horrible plan of attack. Get a room. You two are not subtle, and I'm sure someone else probably caught it. It's just unfortunate for them, but also not that crazy to believe that it was caught on camera if it's at some company event. People take photos. There's videos going on, but you did an over-the-top, dry, handy, clothes-on action. Bro, that's so lame. Like, just go get a room. I'm disappointed. Okay, I don't approve of what they did, using that to get herself a position of power, but at least be subtle, be clever, be cool about it, be stylish, at least have an evil monologue. I don't know. Anyway, next story. Story number 41. About 2 years ago, I worked in a small medical clinic, like probably 20 people in the company total, including doctors. The owner had hired her cousin to be head of HR. Her previous job was a hairdresser, if that'll give you ideas of how qualified she was. Oftentimes, I'd have to switch between clinics, and sometimes I wouldn't have access to clock in, so I would send her emails letting her know my times. Come payroll, she would ask me what my hours were and if just forward my previous email. Other stuff happened, but on to the point. One day, I have to go to the corporate office for something, and I go by her office and there's a dartboard. What's on the dartboard, you ask? A pinned picture of my face with a lot of holes in it. At the time, I was really depressed and down on myself, so saying that did not help. She played it off as a joke that she does this with everyone, can confirm that she did, but I just felt bad. Like I was being targeted for something when I'd worked my butt off for this company. Bent over backwards to help with staff changes, doing the job of 3 people with the same pay, and not getting paid for mileage. I couldn't complain because what was I gonna do? Go to her and put in a complaint against her? Go to the CEO who was her aunt? Yeah, kinda glad I got out when I did because it went right under as I was leaving. Story number 42. I had a one-woman HR department conspire with my boss to try and fire me because during my monthly review, I admitted I was homesick, move across the country for the position, and I'm honestly still not 100% on this, but it seemed like my boss thought I was confessing to alcoholism or something. She said that she had helped her friend through it in a month, like detox or something. Never heard anything else about it though, but to cover my ass, I went into the review notes a few months later to insert a defense and clarification. This must have triggered a clarification because 2 days later, I was suspended for 10 days pending a doctor's note. When I came back, they spent the next 2 months having weekly meetings trying to invent reasons to write me up for performance. But unfortunately for them, between our ticketing system and the monthly reviews, every complaint they made had a documented trail that led back to my boss as the problem. Ultimately, her boss sat down to present me with a PIP that had 0 measurable goals, under which I could be fired as soon as the next day. When I pointed this out and pointed out all the complaints were clearly documented as not my fault, citing ticket numbers, that boss acted as though he didn't know my boss was trying to have me fired, even though he'd attended all the meetings. And I'd started spending those meetings talking about how they could do better aboard my replacement. Boss's boss left me alone in the room for half an hour or so, then came back with an ultimatum of the PIP as is or take a severance offer, which they ended up increasing because our comptroller lost my 401k paperwork, which we did together at her desk, and claimed that I had never filled it out. The clearest evidence of this in hindsight is how sympathetic the CEO of this small company was about my leave of absence, which happened a bit before it was announced to the company that he had drunkenly wrapped his car around a phone pole. But honestly, my boss was such a narcissist that I have no idea what reasons were given for my dismissal behind closed doors. This was a woman who admitted during a monthly review that she'd started to associate her negative feelings toward the person I'd replaced, simply because we shared the same schedule. Didn't apologize or say she was trying to be mindful and work past it. Just let me know she was starting to hate me for reasons completely external to me and outside of my control. But before she decided to have me fired, my performance was so good that, in search for something to nitpick as a manager, she'd weekly complain about and tweak my email signature, essentially finding fault in her own previous week's tweaking. Story number 43. Another staff member decided to go on a big rant about how disgusting it is to have a man competing in the Miss America pageant due to a trans woman competing. The staff member happened to be the 18-year-old daughter of my manager. It pissed off the entire department, but everyone else just found excuses to walk away from the conversation. I couldn't due to the project I was in the middle of, so she wouldn't shut up and kept yabbering at me. Finally, I got pissed off and I told her she may have a problem with it, but I don't. We obviously view it differently, and I didn't want to discuss it further. She got even more angry then and demanded to know why, so I told her. My best friend is a trans woman. She yelled gross and ran to her dad's office, slamming the door. I got dragged into HR an hour later and told by them and my manager that discussions about gender identity are not appropriate in the office and I would be suspended. I asked if the manager's daughter would also be suspended and was told no. I took to my supervisor, the person below my manager, who took it to the division manager, who is above my manager, and suddenly, not only was my suspension canceled, but my manager is suddenly on a leave of absence. He came back the same day his daughter quit. Story number 44. When I was 22, I completed my bachelor's and took a job across the country in Wisconsin. I started working as an engineer for a multinational company. As a young 22-year-old Indian-American girl, I thought the world was my oyster and was excited to start my new adventure. Then I realized I was completely unwelcome by all my white male teammates. They told me that as a woman, I had no right to use logic. Do you know what gender you belong to? And when I spoke to my team lead about my family in India, he curtly replied with, "India is a dirty country I would never visit." When I asked my higher-up management to recruit a career fair at Penn State's Women Engineering Program orientation, my coworkers berated me about how women in engineering programs were discriminatory towards men and how they don't support them. Living alone, thousands of miles away from friends and family was really hard in this environment, so I mustered up the courage to report the comments to HR. There were 20 total comments that my coworkers made to me that were completely unacceptable, such as, "We're celebrating European Day potluck and it's only for people of European descent." Long story short, HR said they did not find any of these comments wrong and dismissed me. Well, I ended up taking initiative and moving to a new and much better position in Alabama, where I was treated with so much respect. Even there, my coworkers were all male, but they were kind, courteous, and respected me as a female engineer. The new position was with the same company, and I was astounded by the complete reversal in company culture. However, the bitter taste that HR in Wisconsin left in my mouth makes me unable to buy any of the company's many consumer goods brands. I naively thought that HR cared for employees, but now that I'm in my mid-20s, I can say my trust in HR has been irreparably broken, and I will not go to them in the future for help. Story number 45. Had a manager who bullied the whole team and was generally aggressive and could be very unpleasant. We're talking racist, anti-Semitic, classist, and sexually inappropriate behaviors. A real bully. I know he had multiple HR write-ups, but he was an older guy with a lot of technical knowledge. When I left the company, I made an official complaint. I wasn't sure about it, I don't want to burn a bridge, but I made the complaint on HR's recommendation. They said they would come back to me within 21 days even after leaving, have it in writing. Well, I gave them 1 year's worth of evidence, printed emails, exact quotes, and examples of behavior, all dated and with details of who said what, who heard, when it was, all with context, pages and pages of info. At least 50 examples, and I didn't even have a record of a tenth of what he did. The sort of things you find in press releases. Took 1 year after leaving the company to get a response from HR. Apparently, they aren't able to let me know what happened after I left. Fair policy, I guess, but I was lied to. The guy is still there. My friends there say he's exactly the same. Bad taste in my mouth. Story number 46. The HR of airline industries. I got hired to be a flight attendant back in 2017 with a well-known airline. Right before I started the 6 weeks training, I confirmed with HR that my tiny hand tattoo wouldn't be a problem, since I heard they didn't like tattoos. They confirmed numerous times that it was small enough not to matter. So I packed my crap and moved across the country to commit to this new job. 5 weeks into this intensive training, after having busted my ass off in this setting, I got called into a room with 5 other trainees, plus 2 HR people. They say, "So, unfortunately, we spoke with HR regarding all of your tattoos, and we have no choice but to let you go, as they all do not comply with our standard dress code." I wasted over 3 months of my life, sacrificed my entire life by moving across the country only to deal with this HR bullcrap. I told them I had confirmed it would be fine, and they just stared at me as if I was crazy. It was so bad, however. Our story landed in the news and became a huge legal case of discrimination. Then came COVID, where they lost all of their jobs. I can't say I feel bad for them, and in fact, it was some nice karma. Story number 47. At my old job, bonuses were decided by a number of rankings between 1 through 4. 1 meant no bonus and a discussion with management about underperformance. 2 was just no bonus. 3 was a small bonus, and 4 was a big bonus. A coworker of mine called Andrew deservedly got a 4 in his end-of-year report and was happy as he could finally pay off the rest of his holiday to the States. However, Andrew was off work for 10 weeks after having a knee operation from midway through October to the second week of December. When he got his bonus in May, the company had took a quarter of his bonus away from him for the 3 months he was on sick leave. Obviously, Andrew was upset as he was unfairly missing out on 2 weeks of his bonus amount, despite being in the top 10% of the entire company and almost single-handedly running his department for the time he was in work. It took 4 meetings with HR, 2 meetings with HR and our manager, and a conference call with the head of HR and upper management to come to the conclusion that he would not receive the extra 2 weeks of pay because HR had battled against it at every opportunity. And of course, taking an extra $150 from a vital, loyal employee is absolutely essential to running a multi-million-pound business. Remember, folks, be loyal to people, not companies, because companies will shoot you in the knee, sleep with your wife, and then eat your dog, and then they will log into your video games and trash talk all of your friends, and then you have to go deal with that afterwards. And then they will sleep on your couch and urinate it and eat your food. Okay, HR is evil. Companies are evil. The only company you can trust is the sponsor of today's video. So guys, this video is brought to you by story number 48. So, I started working for a company that was very pro-uniqueness, and in its rules and orientation materials, it made sure to point out that dating a coworker on your team was fine so long as you weren't their supervisor. A few months into working there, I fell for a woman on my team after we got close, and she came out to me. Things seemed fine until one day I was scheduled for another department and our breaks lined up. We went into the break room, sat socially distanced, had a great time. Then our next day back, they were threatening to write us up for taking our breaks together and sitting at the same table. Then she got sick and I had a migraine, literal migraine disorder that requires meds and bed rest when it's bad, with a doctor's note and a diagnosis. And a week or so later, and they tried to write us up for going home with medical issues. Then they pulled her aside to say that technically we weren't even allowed to date while working on the same team, despite everything we could find saying the opposite, and were trying to pressure her into breaking up with me. All of this from HR and upper management. The manager in question doing all of it is rumored to have slept with and be sleeping with 4 women in our location. And I'm just now starting to think he might want to add my girlfriend to his stable. Story number 49. My company celebrated Native American Heritage Month, which is in November. They put up some stereotypical Indian decorations and a big poster in the cafeteria. It has 2 halves, and each half explained something about Native American Heritage Month. The first half, Thanksgiving. The second half, Diwali. This wasn't done in 1985, this was 2009, and the company is a household name. You know them and even use their products every single day. I pointed out the absurdity to a friend of mine in HR, and the next day, everything was taken down. During our group meeting, 60 other engineers and a manager, our manager told us that the event had been canceled because someone complained while looking directly at me and making full eye contact. This stupidity and many other stupid events led me to leave the company, but I'll never forget how Diwali, a major holiday for Hindus, Jains, and Sikhs, became a part of Native American Appreciation Month. Story number 50. The small medical office I worked for got bought out by a giant medical company in our region. Not only were we obligated to attend their bullcrap Joy Week or whatever celebrations, by the way, this was literally crap like a choir performing on stage, a bunch of speeches about why healthcare is good, and absolutely nothing anyone would ever want to sit through hours of in their entire lives, but they brought in, for our office, a woman who admitted that she had no prior experience being an office manager. And she had decided immediately that she hated me. I was the youngest person in that office, and I had heard that older women can be catty and petty with younger women in the workplace, that they somehow think are more attractive, or even just were more likable, but I'd always been dismissive of it. It just seems so much like a women, right? So childish kind of bullcrap stereotype, but that's really all I can think as to why she basically hated me on sight. And she hated me hardcore. She'd give me the silent treatment for days for minor infractions, or sometimes seemingly nothing at all, then pull me into her office and yell at me for something I was supposed to do that I didn't know I was supposed to do, because, she wouldn't tell me. Some of those minor infractions involved things that other people were allowed to do, like use their phones at their desks, but she decided that I alone was not. Sometimes she seemed eager to make me cry, particularly when she pulled me into her office. Like she wasn't going to unlock the door and let me leave until she saw an adequate amount of tears. Whenever a new task arose in the office, unless it had to be performed by a specialist, she typically assigned it to me, unless someone else volunteered for it. This meant I always had too much work to do, but she just pointed out that I sucked at my job, which is why I couldn't get it all done. At one point, I came in on 2 separate weekends to catch up on everything, and she never submitted the paperwork to show that I had. She said that it was my fault that I had to come in, so I didn't get paid. I developed a genuine fear and terror of going into work. I cried a lot, even just getting ready in the morning. Our office had one HR liaison who was basically presented as the one contact person we had for the whole department. You couldn't get a hold of them without going through her. So I tried very quietly to get a hold of her, only to have her call me back listing off all the things that my boss had told her about me. I don't know if my boss went over my head and had been bad-mouthing me to her for some time, or if that HR rep just thought it would be a good idea to call the devil boss and see if she'd set the record straight or something, but I had to sit there and be chastised over the phone about how dare I complain to HR when I refused to do my work. I'm so disorganized. I'm so distracting to others. So I exaggerated about being sick and needing hospital treatment and further therapy because that crap was unnecessary. And am I even going to therapy? And F you, Kathy, I turned in the effing paperwork and you effing know it. And by the way, you want to know why I went to the hospital? I had a total effing mental breakdown. That's why. That's when I realized, or at least felt, I was in my early 20s and pretty naive and inexperienced, that I had nothing, no one I could turn to. She turned HR against me in her sick little crusade, and if I tried to contact someone else there, who's to say I'd just be making the situation worse? Again? But you know what's even better? I got another job lined up, turned in my 2 weeks, and she called the other job and trash-talked about me, so I lost the job. So now I was unemployed. She was a B-word of the highest nature. On my last day, another employee told me that she had overheard the conversation on the phone of her expressing concerns to my new employer and was happy as a clam for the rest of the day. That effing woman. And the good news is that I was offered an exit interview, and that exit interview was over the phone from their central location, not from my office or from the building's HR, and I thought, F it, and let it rip. I was honest about everything. The woman on the other end just murmured, "Oh my God," and when I told her about my boss, he threatened to fire me if I continued to take time off every other Wednesday for medical treatment post-hospitalization. Every once in a while, I try to see where that monster is now, but I can't find her on LinkedIn. Story number 51. I had an old manager who went through my messages to my girlfriend on my personal phone when I left it in the office. It was a retail job, so we weren't allowed phones on the shop floor. And he was a prick anyway, so was basically telling my girlfriend how much of a prick he was being that day. And he was making weird comments to me all day about what I had been saying. One of my friends managed to catch me one-on-one, and he had been bragging about going through my phone and calling me all sorts of names, and how I'm so negative, whiny, etc. I called HR straight away to lodge a complaint and told them I am uncomfortable being in a store with him going forward whilst investigation takes place. HR decided to move me to a store 3 hours away on a train. I didn't drive at the time as I was city living. I had to spend a week in this store, which started on a bank holiday Monday, so travel was even worse, and I spent the week leaving at 5 a.m. and getting home at around 8 to 9 p.m., as they did not offer me any hotel. Oh, and I had to pay for my travel and claim it back. When it came to the investigation, they spent the time asking me if I should be using my phone outside of break times. It was common in this job, by the way, to be forced to work overtime for no extra pay, and they asked if I'm sure he didn't see the messages on my home screen as I hadn't read them, to which I replied that they weren't set to show when my phone was locked. After it all, absolutely nothing happened to him at all, and he continued his bullying ways. I left the company not long after, and about a month after that, it went under. I did message him when they went under, rubbing it in his face, but it is not nearly the amount of karma he deserves. Story number 52. I'm sure this will get buried. I worked at a large company in Georgia while deployed to Afghanistan for 6 months, Air National Guard, and they promoted 2 of my coworkers. I thought, no big deal, maybe I'll get a promotion too. I came back to work and my group now had a new boss, and she takes me into her office and says that I won't be getting a promotion even though everyone had nothing but positive things to say about me and my work ethic. So I contacted the JAG. They sent my boss and boss's boss an email stating that they cannot withhold my promotion due to deployment. I was personally told at this time by multiple coworkers that they didn't promote me because I was gone so long, and it put a strain on the team. Well, it comes time to talk to HR, and while I'm literally sitting in there, the HR lady gets a call from my boss's boss, and she tries to hide it. Tells me they didn't withhold anything. It basically died there. JAG said they had no case. My coworkers denied saying they heard my boss's boss talking about withholding it, and later, I got told that the HR lady for my group and my boss's boss are literally like best friends. So, F all of them. I got a job somewhere else. Story number 53. I had a boss that was abusive and demeaning and made my life a living hell. I was working as an executive assistant for an unnamed, very large e-commerce company named after a large river in South America. I'll leave it up to you to figure that one out. My boss would frequently come back from meetings and scream and berate me for booking meetings that were unimportant, a waste of time, full of idiots, etc. Often, he would send me long emails or Slack messages, or call me at 3 or 4 a.m. to continue his ranting, and would fill me with absolute dread that often I would be so stressed out that I would make myself sick so I wouldn't have to face him in the morning. I worked long hours because he expected me to. I never got to enjoy my weekend because he was constantly harassing me. I saw him behave like this not only with me, but his anger and abusiveness had an effect on the whole department. I saw him scream at our finance partner so horribly in a meeting, throw a whiteboard eraser at him, call him an effing imbecile. Our finance partner, a friend of mine and a grown man who had worked at the company for years, left the meeting in tears. Finally, I had had enough and started to talk to our HR partner about this. She was a woman who was maybe 6 or 7 years older than me and made me feel like I could confide in her and make some real improvements to the culture. On the side, I'd been interviewing and looking for another job because I was absolutely miserable. When I received an offer, I was hesitant to accept because I was afraid of how my current boss would react. My mental health and my physical health were deteriorating, and my boyfriend was begging me to quit because he could see what kind of a toll this man was taking on me. I approached HR in confidence and put in my 2 weeks' notice with her. She offered to help me craft my resignation because she knew I was scared of him retaliating. I picked my last 2 weeks when he was on vacation so I wouldn't have to face him in person. Some would call this a cowardly move, but I had endured his abuse for over a year and I simply couldn't take it anymore. Flash forward a few months later, my startup job is not looking great, and a friend at the company reaches out to me to see if I would be interested in another position in her department. I told her yes, but when she pulled up my profile to apply for the job, she saw that I had been marked as "do not rehire." It hurt because I worked there for 4+ years, never had a bad performance review ever, had nothing but glowing accolades from former bosses. Turns out my girlfriend at HR had been ratting me out to my former boss the whole time and told him that I was trying to report him for being abusive and had collaborated with him to put me on the blacklist. making sure I can never be rehired again. I know this because I contacted a friend of mine that worked in HR that was able to pull up this information. The things she wrote were shocking, such as employee had hard time accepting authority, employee has paranoid thoughts about how her boss is out to get her, employee does not fit in with the work culture that we are building at this department. HR is not your friend, people. They work for the company to protect its interests, not yours. I was a small cog in the machine, and my job was not at all important compared to a senior executive's. Don't trust them. The only person who is looking out for you in this situation is you. I'm still at the startup now, and things are much better. I'm happy with my work-life balance, but I still came away from that experience very cynical. So I suppose it's taking me just this story for it to finally click with me, but these are just very reminiscent of abusive relationships in some ways for some of the stories that we've gotten here today. And having been a narrator on both of the channels, there have been a lot of emotionally abusive relationship situations that I have read about and you've heard, so this just feels like a lot of overlap, and I'm just now starting to realize that. And of course, finances and situations and a whole bunch of other factors come into play as to why these people can't leave, but just much like with actual emotional relationships, romantic relationships, just leave sometimes isn't always, immediately feasible. There's a mental aspect, there's a financial aspect, there's a power aspect, there's abuse going on. I don't know. There's a little bit of overlap here, or at least I'd like to think there is. Maybe I'm wrong. But anyway, next story. Story number 54. I think my biggest thing is being in a department that HR clearly thinks has the least value in the company, support, which is fine and dandy. HR director also likes to change titles of positions to not pay you or to minimize raises. Examples. Friend applied for a DevOps position, which he was offered, and the raise was not much as expected. The HR director had changed the title to Cloud Operations Specialist and kept it there. For myself, I was brought in low. I needed a job, that one's not on HR, and anyways, I moved up quickly and got a promotion, and it felt like an awesome raise. Until I found out all the other level 1 people were being hired on significantly higher than me. I was salary and was expected to help them on after-hour calls, etc. Cool, feels good, and I spoke to HR, blah blah blah, and my director who got me a small bump in pay. That next day, got a job for my title at a 40% base pay increase, and the benefits were much better. I ended up doubling my pay the first year I worked for the new company at the same title. HR tried to keep me by offering half the increase. That means you could have paid me that initially, and you're asking me to stay for $15K less? Worse benefits, worse everything? He tried to keep me 3 different times, and eventually I just asked him to stop offering unless it was matching my offer. Anyways, there was a whole lot more, and my buddy who filled my spot is basically going through similar situations. And another friend. It's so odd. He sucks so much. HR did the same thing, because he made the argument that the title for level 2 pays X amount, and then HR updated the position title to Specialist 2 instead of Senior Support Engineer. Good times. Story number 55. This friend of mine, let's call him A, wasn't very happy in the team he was in. The boss was a controlling ass full of charisma but little substance, and he struck a good rapport with this newly appointed head of another department who saw him as a good asset. So he approached his boss in good faith, explaining that he sees his career doing better in the other department, and he'd be able to help his present department better from there because his passions lay there. The boss gives him a patient listening, called the HR person, and explained everything to her as well. She agreed to everything and promised that she would get along with the boss and will definitely try to find him a place in the new guy's team, or if not there, then in a similar department in one of the sister companies. A had no option but to trust him. They were so sweet. After a couple of weeks of waiting, he gets called by the boss and the HR person. They tell him that though the new guy likes him, he doesn't have budgets to hire anymore. Then they show him the bleak picture of trying to find another job outside. You haven't built any of the relevant skills here. Why would anyone even think of interviewing you when everyone hires only favorites? You weren't going to get this much money elsewhere, your career was in shambles anyway, when we hired you, etc. Just working on chipping away his confidence, and gave him a short notice. Stay here and love this job, or quit and we'll find a replacement. Later, when A met up with the new guy in an official event, the new guy told him his side of the story. HR came to him with the proposal sort of expecting him to refuse, but when he showed enthusiasm, they turned around and gave him the excuse of not having enough budgets, purportedly at the behest of A's current boss, who wielded a
lot of influence in the company. Finally, A had to leave the job because his boss wasn't happy with his desire to move out from under him, and life had been made very difficult. Also, same HR had reduced another employee's rating, and therefore the annual bonus, because she saw him take medicines in office for a couple of weeks. So he must be sick, so he must have not have been very productive, apparently. Story number 56. My own. Someone tried to fight me at work. They started yelling at me and kicked the ladder I was on, then tried to climb it and got removed. I ended up getting reported to HR. The first thing they said was, "We want you to know you're protected against any retaliation." So I disclosed everything, and my work retaliated and tried to get me kicked out of school. I worked for my university and the country. I was a foreign student and eventually tried to interfere with my job when I got a new job. HR did nothing to protect me and seemingly just acted like my friend to get inside knowledge on how I could defend myself. My work didn't back off until I expressed to HR I had concrete evidence that I could use to sue them. It sucks because I used to coach people in trouble on work policies and that HR was there to help you. I truly believed it. Now I coach people that HR is not your friend and they work explicitly for your job and will act in their favor, and their only goal is to prevent their employer from getting sued. Story number 57. First job, lot of internal politics because company was bought by investor who wanted to pump up the company for a sale or IPO. Lots of Americans injected in C-level positions that don't exactly understand European labor laws and customs. After a lot of politics, my department ended up working for the ginger version of Donald Trump. After 2 months or so, my boss ended up going home crying one day after too much bullying from this guy and never returned. HR never did anything with him, and after 1.5 years of sick leave fulfilled their legal requirements and fired him. I just got my first job after graduation, so was still green and on a 1-year contract. Got called into Ginger Trump's office a few days later, and the head of HR was with him, while there were like 7 in the HR department that could have been present instead of the head of HR. Told me that I did not perform well, and the fact that I had to ask what the issue was proved how bad I was performing. I was given 2 more months to improve, not knowing what was wrong. Had a conversation with that same head of HR a while later to talk about what I could improve, and then he offered some improvement plans to keep me busy for the 2 months, but he basically said, "Sucks to be you, go find a new job." New boss for my department came in about 1 week later, and he helped me get a new job at another company, but I later was told he had to fire me by Ginger Trump or he would be fired himself, which was weird in and of itself. Ginger Trump just wanted the old team out, and I was easy pickings with a 1-year contract. But he and HR could have been honest about it. I was performing well, and I was well liked. I had 3 goodbye parties, and even the COO looked at me when I told him, and he said, "You're the only one who does work around here. Why do they fire you?" I don't care about the fact that I got fired. It got me a better job, but dumping me at my first job with the reason of not performing was a jerk move. Story number 58. Worked at a startup that really touted company culture and principles and all that BS. HR manager was the least professional HR person I've ever met. She would gossip nonstop. She would disclose personal medical information, like when we had someone not show up for their shift because she tried to take her own life and was in the psych ward and everyone found out about it from HR. She will readily tell you someone else's salary or how their performance review went. She'll also constantly have a list of problem people who she is always trying to fix. These people almost always got fired, and she had been caught in public talking loudly about private personal issues several times. One of the worst experiences with her is that she tried to coax someone into filing a complaint against me, not knowing I was actually really good friends with the person. Basically, she went to chat with him and asked him, "Hey, don't you think OP does this all the time?" And he was like, "No, I've never seen OP do that before." And she continued to try to get him to agree with her about random negative statements about me, which he wouldn't. She then came into my office, closed the door, and sat down and told me that he had come to her distraught because I was behaving this certain way and doing these things. I immediately got very anxious and upset that I had unknowingly done something to hurt our friendship, which was the first time she was realizing we were friends at all. We tried to confront her about it, and she denied the entire thing. The wildest story is that she was always pretending to be my friend and was once telling me about an issue she was having with her 11-year-old stepdaughter texting inappropriate pictures to boys in her class. But the pictures were actually of fully nude male adult content stars that she had found online while standing in her office. She tells me this story and shows me screenshots of the text threads with the pictures. The man in the photo is well endowed, larger than average, but definitely within the realm of what I've seen in person. And then she says to me, "The worst part about this poor Photoshop job is that she will have unrealistic expectations about men's bodies for the rest of her life now. I mean, this is so obviously fake. Look how big it is." The poor woman had never seen a chicken even close to that size. Management made it worse by siding with her all the time and never reprimanding her. She is still the HR manager there, and I think they have something like a 40% turnover rate. And all their online reviews bash her. Story number 59. One company I worked for had a bunch of people in HR that had zero experience in such a role. Theory is that they have sucked at the job that they initially hired for, but most of them were too pretty, and one of them had too many important connections, so they were put in HR. All male upper management, by the way. HR all female with an average age under 30. This lack of experience led to a trend of hiring/promoting people that were extremely arrogant because arrogance was mistaken as confidence. My manager, for example, was a Mr. Know-It-All micromanager and has been named as the key reason for quitting by more than half a dozen people, including one from another department whose life he made to hell. He still has a job as a manager. Eventually, I quit as a part of the mass exodus where around 20% of the staff there left in a period of 18 months. Unfortunately, this was the most industrious and talented 20% of the company. I don't want to blow my own horn here, but my new job pays 50% more, and one of my other colleagues has doubled her salary in her new role. Anyhow, our dear leaders have addressed this by saying personal fluctuations are normal and healthy in any organization. But reality is that innovation has grounded to a halt and the company is in dire straits. Rumors around that they're trying to sell off the IP and trademarks so the investors get a return. But this also means folding up shop for good. Story number 60. We don't have an HR at the tiny nonprofit I work at. My boss, our executive director, claims to be in charge of HR things, and I'm the only male that works there. So, I had a female coworker who once espoused loudly in our open floor office that once women are in power, there should be a retribution period against men for vaguely defined historical underrepresentation and mistreatment of women in society. Violent retribution. Now, this seemed pretty extreme, so I asked a clarifying question along the lines of, surely you don't mean like violence or forced imprisonment or anything, trying to break a little tension in the room and waiting for my fellow human beings to pipe up and say something to tone the situation down. Well, she made it clear that men would get what was coming to them, and I reported this to my boss, that this made me pretty uncomfortable and felt like a targeted harassment. Further, that none of my fellow coworkers thought it was worth defending me, the lone male. My boss then told me that I can see myself saying the same things she did when I was her age, and told me not to worry about it. I can't wait to quit. Story number 61. I am a type 1 diabetic, and someone at work had complained about me testing my blood in the lunchroom, where I always sat by myself because I was on the in-house security team and not allowed to make friends. For those who don't know, to test my blood, I prick my finger with a tiny needle, which is hidden from view completely, and I squeeze a tiny drop of blood onto a little device. Once everything is done, I put the tiny blood device in a Kleenex and Ziploc bag to throw out at home because I found people have weird reactions to me throwing that stuff in a public garbage can. Even at a friend's house, I ask before I use their garbage bins for my stuff. So my manager told me I have to use the bathroom to test my blood because someone complained. I told him the bathroom is clean and I will not be doing that, and he needs to find a better alternative, especially since this is an action I take multiple times a day to keep myself alive. I don't do it for fun. The next day, he said that our HR VP said I am required to find my own alternatives that suit both parties. In Canada, I am legally not required to do anything, and the company has to find or create a scenario that I approve of and I am comfortable with. I requested a meeting with her to discuss, as I was viewing this as a discrimination against me. They were trying to treat me differently from other people based off my medical condition, which I am unable to change. Sounds like discrimination. And HR refused for 2 weeks to talk to me and kept sending my manager to speak with me. I told him that this is an HR concern, and I will not change my habits until I speak with HR. And if they try to push any action on me, I have a lawyer waiting who specializes in HR and diabetes cases, which I did. My doctor hooked me up when I told her what was going on. Once I mentioned having a lawyer, all the talking stopped and they left me alone. I didn't get fired and no one complained again. I quit a year later though when I found a better job in a company who treated treated everyone like an actual person. So guys, I'm starting to see something manifest within my brain wires right now, and that is HR is evil and heartless and soulless and is not your friend and is there to defend the company. But you know who is an equal fighter? Lawyers, who are soulless and heartless and not really your friends, but are there to defend you and work for your money. So it's just unstoppable force meets a movable object. It is a worthy foe of evil, soulless darkness in these people's hearts. I'm sure not all lawyers are bad guys. Come on, we saw Better Call Saul. You know, Saul Goodman's a great guy. He did nothing wrong. Anyway, next story. Story number 62. I moved up to New York to be with my soon-to-be wife and found a job at a large conglomerate, which has a highly inflated sense of its importance in the world. Ironically, the company also prides itself on its HR function and has companies pay it ungodly sums to travel there and learn all about leadership and HR. Anyway, I arrived in the midst of a reorganization, and the guy who was supposed to be my manager was forced out in favor of the seemingly talented guy out of central casting. Young, former military, relatively handsome, the company loved that profile. He had never managed a corporate team, so his leadership style was basically what he had learned managing teams in the army. Rah, rah, rah. Isolate those that are different. Kiss up to your superiors. As the one black guy on the team, also the most educated and experienced, I drew the short straw. He starts habitually calling me sexual chocolate, and he was comfortable doing this one-on-one in the middle of meetings with my peers. Everyone either laughed or looked uncomfortable, but no one said anything, including me. He had the ear of upper management. The team was at once fawning over him and intimidated by him. And it's a part of New York where no one wants to lose their job because there's absolutely nothing else there. I knew I had to make it about a year before my soon-to-be wife and I moved south in a planned move, so I kept my mouth shut. I did tell other people outside the team that I trusted, and they understood the difficult situation I was in. Then, fast forward 9 months, sorry this is taking a while, and this guy calls me sexual chocolate at our table at the department Christmas party. 12 people were at the table, and this time my boss was drunk, and the folks at the table did not join in with the laughter. My wife and I had already started our process of moving south, so I just said, F it, I'm lodging an HR complaint. I file a form and speak to a representative, who forwards me to her superior, who forwards me to her superior, who lets me know that they are in the process of interviewing the team. They didn't believe me initially, so I welcomed this process because I now had 12 witnesses who were all present and seemingly uncomfortable with what my boss had done and had been doing. This takes 4 months, and I had already moved down to the south and transferred to another group. But eventually, I get a call from my HR rep's superior 3 times removed, who lets me know that no one on the team would corroborate my experiences. Everyone claimed to have not heard the manager mention the name calling even once. And then the call turned accusatory. What do you have against this guy? Why would you wait to tell us something if it actually happened? Why do none of your teammates support your version of things? Have you ever made accusations like this at previous companies? Do you tend to embellish things? No bullcrap. The manager called me shortly after that call and said he had no recollection of anything he was being accused of. I promptly cursed him the F out for both his benefit and whatever HR reps were on the phone with them, and I never spoke to him again. He is still at the company, rising along the ranks, unbothered and unaffected. Story number 63. I like to think of mine as a learning experience, and I figured I would share. So, I started my first job at a mid-sized tech company straight out of college. My mandatory school internship was there, and one of the departments loved me so much, they offered me a starting position. I took it obviously, as it was fun and a great starting position, and 3 months into the job, the boss who had hired me was let go because of not telling his boss when issues arose in a timely manner. He was given the opportunity to step down in a senior role, but no longer a manager. He declined, and this is when I could feel a momentum shift. I stayed at the company, kept my head down and did all of the grunt work, made coffee for everyone in the morning, volunteered for the night shift, stayed on it for 9 months and longer than anyone else ever had, and I even at some point cleaned up the bathroom after one of the toilets overflowed. I'm a helpful individual person by nature, so all of this was done without any expectations, and I generally loved most of the guys I worked with. Not to mention we played ultimate frisbee on our lunch break and had a ping pong table around for anyone and everyone to play, and it was open all the time. This was over the next 2 years, but just want to give some background information to give a bird's eye view from my perspective. 1 month after the original boss left, another level 2 tech was somehow promoted to managing all of the level 1 techs. I had no issue with this guy because frankly, I had not really interacted with them. I worked under this guy for the next 2 years. My first annual review was as expected. Extremely willing to get the job done, hard worker and friendly. At this point, there wasn't a dedicated HR manager, so things were a bit loose as far as HR went. My critiques were that I wasn't as technical as they had hoped. Total bullcrap. I had achieved 4 certifications, including CCENT and MSCA. You can look those up and see what they are, only using them as a reference to show I am extremely technical on paper. My numbers were also higher than average, but not anything crazy because I refused to fudge the numbers and put that weight on our customers. We sold blocks of service hours, and I felt a sense of honor to not scuff the numbers in our favor. Well, another year rolls around and I have gone above and beyond. 6 certifications in my pocket, MCSC completed, doing project work, night shift volunteer, always the first to be picked at Ultimate Frisbee, and played softball on the Office Park League. We lost every game, but that is a different story. At my second official annual review, I was bidding to reach the next level at our job, engineer and no longer an analyst, and I walk into the meeting confident, head held high, and eager to get it started. I start reading the official document submitted to the HR manager, and to my astonishment, to see that there is a bunch of personal attacks on me. Jake holds personal grudges and is vengeful. Jake consistently falls short of personal relationships and commitments, etc. My heart is absolutely broken at this point. I have never in my life been so insulted by an individual. This person, my direct manager, has written a bunch of lies and given an unprofessional psychoanalysis on my personality in a company review. I refuse to sign and demand this be brought in front of his manager, the director of our apartment. We sit down and I say I want examples of these personal attacks made against my character. You cannot just say things to damage my character within this company without showing me proof. And he cannot come up with any, and instead of punishing him, HR just has him rewrite that personal stuff out of the review. I say I refuse to sign it because it is a bunch of bullcrap. Turns out I was wrong. At this point, I escalate even further to the CEO of the company. He takes me out to lunch and says he has heard of what is going on and asks me what he would like for him to do. I say I want to get to the next level, but I feel this person has caused such damage that I cannot see a world where that can happen. My manager has been secretly working behind my back and eventually stabbed me in the back at, up to this point, the most critical point in my professional career. For the sake of time, my company protected this rat and, in essence, forced me to find another job. So I took another job 2 weeks later for $20K more. This was 4 years ago at this point. I'm now making almost triple that amount working as a developer at an expanding company in a new industry. I am being groomed for management, and keep that original review in my safe. I remember that feeling of defeat and having tears in my eyes sitting in that room talking to my 2 bosses. I remember the HR lady I was friends with smiling in my face, telling me everything will be okay, and eventually doing nothing. I will never in my life act in the manner this man did, and I will forever hold on to this review to remind myself that HR is not an individual's friend and to never act like a piece of crap to my colleagues. I hope this story helps someone out there. Keep your head up high. Learn to walk away when you're being disrespected. And if nothing else, HR is not your friend. They are there to protect the company and not you. They will not go to bat to protect you because to them, you are expendable. Story number 64. I was a high performer on my team and rocking my job. I disclosed a medical issue and requested reasonable and minor accommodations from HR, basically a different seating arrangement. And then I had troubles with my completely incompetent and unprofessional manager who refused to abide by the accommodations. I went to HR with these concerns over a period of months. I continued to have issues with this manager. One particular time, she made a completely inappropriate comment to me invalidating my medical issue. I went to HR to vent my frustrations. I remember being animated with HR and explicitly stating that my frustration was toward the situation and not the HR rep. And the HR rep and I were on friendly terms. She had done my HR screening when I was hired. We joked in the halls and had friendly conversations. She was trying to help me address the issue, and there was a tone of, "I know your manager is crazy too, and her actions are inappropriate," and I felt like we had a human connection in this conversation. And then, a week later, I got fired for unprofessional conduct, i.e. expressing concerns to HR about my manager. Story number 65. Not exactly HR, but the VP of the company, who ended up responding to an HR complaint. I worked at a movie theater and had a coworker who had a lot of insecurities and petty grudges against employees. He and I crossed paths when I started out as an usher, basically a janitor. He was the head projectionist, which was a meaningless title that he begged for after working at the theater for so long. One day, I had some downtime, so I went to the box office to to talk to the cashier. No flirting or anything, just regular conversation. Well, he walks in moments later and gives me the stink eye. I found out quickly that the cashier was his girlfriend. Later that day, he approaches me telling me that as an usher, I need to give promotional speeches prior to the start of every movie. It was part of an usher's duty, but wasn't enforced on weekdays because the theater had low attendance and it would take away from cleaning time. He decided to enforce it and explicitly stated that if I was even a minute late to give a speech, he would personally write me up. I had no idea at that point that he had that power. Fast forward to that summer, we have 4 Irish students who are working for us at the summer season. Super friendly people, never got into any conflicts with the staff. Well, one day, one of the Irish girls is late for a speech, and the guy comes downstairs and states he's going to write her up. It puts her in a terrible mood for the rest of the day. The other Irish informed management, who told the projectionist he didn't have that power. Fast forward over a year later, the guy is promoted to manager and almost instantly makes people's lives miserable. He'd constantly be over our shoulders and would allow for minimal interaction. He did some other things to people that possibly crossed some lines. So a bunch of the staff draft up a letter and sign it, myself concluded. We're interviewed one by the VP, and I can tell she's not buying anything I'm saying. I bring up how I think it was a mistake for him to be promoted since he abused power he didn't even have. That's when the VP says that as the head projectionist, he did have power. That was the first I'd ever heard of it, and seemed to contradict what he was told when he bullied that Irish girl. Not exactly sure of what the outcome was, but for the next 2 months, the guy would just stay in the manager's office and not come downstairs. From what I heard, he was possibly on some sort of suspension. As soon as that possible suspension was lifted, he went after everybody that signed the letter. If you hadn't quit, he'd basically try to fire you for any little thing. In my case, I didn't do anything that he could fire me for, so he would slash my hours from 6 to 8 to 2 hours. It happened every time me and him worked together, and literally no one else would be sent home except for me. It didn't matter what position I worked in. It got so bad because my checks shrunk, and the gas became less and less worth it. I had to quit. Story number 66. Back in 2003, I worked for a medium-sized manufacturing company with an HR lady who was truly creatively evil. J.K. Rowling could have used her as the template for Dolores Umbridge, except she was bless your heart Southern instead of British. And this place was not well known for giving out bonuses, at least not at our location. That year, at the annual holiday party, everyone had to cram into a small break room on their lunch break. The HR lady was waiting to greet everyone with employees' names on them and had a huge smile plastered on her face. As we walked in, she gave us our envelope with a "Happy Holidays! Don't open it until after the meeting." Knowing that she was evil, some folks started opening their envelopes anyway once everyone was sitting down. Inside was a holiday card, and what's this? A check. For how much? Looks like a lot. People started getting excited, and when the meeting was done, a couple of folks even rushed out to the bank. Well, I had worked there long enough to be really suspicious of this, and so had my manager. He called up a friend he had at the regional HR, and they told him no one was being laid off, which was our first thought. They told him the individual facilities determined the amount of holiday bonus, if any. And then I noticed the amount of the bonus check looked real familiar. I pulled an old pay stub out of my glove box and realized it exactly matched the amount of my gross pay for 2 weeks before taxes, insurance, etc. I also realized it was a Wednesday of a pay week, and we usually got our direct deposits on Friday. I told my manager, "Boss, I know we aren't supposed to talk about pay, and I don't know what you got in your envelope, but here's what I noticed." And I still remember his words. He said, "Let me check mine." She didn't. She couldn't be that evil. Crap, hold on, let me check this. And yup, it turns out she distributed everyone's upcoming paycheck without the deductions taken out as a live check inside holiday cards and not a word of explanation at the meeting. They called everyone back to the shop floor for an emergency meeting where she explained cheerily, "I just thought everyone would appreciate having that money before Christmas. I'm just going to need to take double the withholdings from the January check." And so that's the story of what was probably the closest I have ever come to seeing an angry mob of violence. One guy had gone out to put a deposit on a used car he had been desperately needing. Another lady had called her family and told them that they would be able to afford the surgery her son needed for correcting a birth defect. Angry little knots of people just standing around looking at each other in disbelief. The HR lady needed to have the cops come and escort her to her car that day, and the facility security guys needed to hire an extra man to guard the front office for the remainder of her time there. There were plenty of other instances of evil HR genius, but those stories are for another time. Story number 67. HR forgot to tell me certain things about my maternity leave, then harassed me and my supervisor when I came back because they kept forgetting that I went on maternity maternity leave. I did the responsible thing and asked for a meeting with HR before my daughter was born so I could understand everything I needed about my maternity leave. I wanted to make absolutely sure I didn't shoot myself in the foot with anything. It is policy at my company that the first 5 days of maternity leave is taken as PTO. After that, short-term disability kicks in. Once that's exhausted, long-term disability takes over. We can use banked PTO to supplement the disability benefits so that we receive full pay for as long as the PTO lasts. Pretty good benefits on paper. Because we're a consulting firm, our performance's ratings are based heavily on utilization. I specifically asked the HR rep if my maternity leave would affect my utilization. I was told that it would not. So imagine my surprise when I came back from leave to find that my numbers were so bad that it was impossible to make rip the difference and hit my goal. What they forgot to tell me was that leave in and of itself does not affect utilization, but taking that much PTO does. I supplemented with PTO, so my numbers tanked. Now, my husband's job at the time required 100% travel. He was home every Thursday and then back out every Sunday. So during the week, I was all alone with our new baby. We do not have any family in town, so when she got sick, it was up to me to take more time off and take care of her. I maxed out my PTO because kids in the first year get sick a lot when you have to leave them at daycare. So HR started asking my boss why I was taking so much PTO. They called my boss one day demanding to know why I was still taking PTO when I had already had 5 days off in a row at the beginning of the year. My boss had to remind them it's company policy that the first 5 days of maternity leave are mandatory PTO. Story number 68. It feels weird to post this when there's so much horrible crap, but after finishing my apprenticeship, I got a job offer from the company. This was in January 2020. Due to some restrictions and exams I still had to take, I could only start in June of 2020 though. Then COVID hit and everything was kind of shifted around. The company now required every new hire to go through HR to get permission. Suddenly, I was out of a job. 6 coworkers, my manager, his manager, our client, and even the effing CEO put their word in and asked HR to just hire me. It was now June of 2020. In May, I started interviewing with another company because I thought even after the CEO asked to hire me and I still didn't have my contract, that I wouldn't be hired anyway. So in June, I got a job offer from the other company. Well, I told my manager that I was going to leave for the other company. He promised to raise hell and at least give him a week. So I did. I was friends with the guy after all. A week passes and it's the day I'm supposed to accept the offer by the other company. And literally an hour before I wanted to call them, my manager called me and offered me my job. He had already had the contract and promised me HR couldn't do anything about it anymore. Well, folks, once again, here in the video, we have found that HR has taken another L. They have not received many throughout the course of this video, so we have to cherish the ones we get. And the only way that this story would have been better is if it was number 69, okay? Because it's the funny internet number, okay? It's just... Oh, I'm pathetic. I'm an adult. Oh my god. Anyway, next story. Story number 69. At one of my old jobs, the HR ladies were known gossips and no one wanted to talk to them. Anytime anyone reported a disability, suddenly the entire workplace knew about the disability and all the details of it. I only continued working there so I could find another job. I found it comical that suddenly we had a meeting where the president of the company was trying to figure out why there was only a 10% retention rate. Well, gee, sir, I can't possibly imagine why. And one HR lady also asked people ridiculously personal questions about their disabilities and insulted people with mental health problems. A pregnant woman asked them for time off for her husband's baby, and they spread a rumor that she was pregnant with another man's baby, and she was taking time off to leave and escape her abusive husband so that she could live with the love of her life. Turns out she had a healthy baby, and she and her husband were still very much in love. It was pretty much common knowledge that if you have any kind of issue that required you to ask HR for time off for anything, you might as well fold your hand and quit because they were going to share all of the details of your personal life and make you out to be some kind of bad guy. Story number 70. I worked for a defense contractor, and when it came time for annual evals, my manager, who was awesome, was fully transparent and told me he put me in for exceeds expectations for my first year review with said organization. But HR turned around and said, "He's not been here long enough for that. We're changing it to meets expectations." I was pissed, to say the least, so I reached out to my HR business partner and I got nothing back. So I reached out again, and a third time. And after that, I reached out to her direct manager, and I got a call back from my HR business partner telling me that's just the way the dice roll, and that there's nothing I can do about it. I asked why, and she said the matter wasn't up for discussion. Well, 5 minutes later, my manager comes and grabs me and asks me to walk with him. So I do, and he says, "Why are you so butthurt about this? I just got an angry call from HR saying you went over your HR BP's head, etc. And my raise was tied to my rating, and I wanted what I had worked for." So my boss says, "Listen, man, I'm just as pissed as you are, and let me see what we can do. But you gotta stop barking up this tree. I've seen them discharge people for it." Now, I've seen this guy fight for his team, but this company doesn't care about that. They just want to do their little stacking exercises. And sorry, your hardworking team isn't as tenured as this less hardworking team, so they get their 4/5, 4 to 6% increases. I thanked him for what he had done for me, and it was at the point that I decided that this company's culture wasn't for me. Kudos to those who can do it, but I couldn't. I embarked upon one of the most deliberate job searches I've ever taken. Most of my positions were either a result of a recruiter calling me or just finding a position and calling that recruiter. The result, though, was one of the most professionally satisfying positions I have ever had, with an amazing team and company. Story number 71. The specialty pharmacy I previously worked for had become a rotating door. Employees would come and go because management was just god-awful. Well, current and former employees took to Glassdoor reviews and basically annihilated anything positive about the company. So, management wrote their own reviews to increase ratings and asked their cronies to do the same. It was quite obvious when you read them as knowledge of how many certifications the pharmacy had been spoken of to make them look good. Us underlings didn't have that knowledge. The compliance officer obviously wrote it. We were asked to do an anonymous survey, handwritten and given back to our manager to basically see who the perpetrators were, not to see how they can do better like they were claiming. After this was compiled, the compliance officer and the main supervisor would read them and talk about them in their office. It didn't even go to HR. They would just target the blunt/honest people, and somehow a bunch of them ended up getting let go. I had already had my bouts with the supervisor's bullcrap and put in my notice, and the place was just sold to another company because the CEO is an a-hole, and they couldn't save themselves. Good riddance. So, really quick, the company was Rite Aid, right? Like, what other company could it be? Like, they were sold and bought by somebody else? Like, who else wants to buy Rite Aid other than CVS or Walgreens? Maybe Walmart? I don't know. It was Rite Aid. That's where I'm putting my money down, unless I don't know what a specialty pharmacy is. Maybe I don't. I'm stupid. Anyway, next story. Story number 72. At my last job, I got fairly sick with what I now believe was probably COVID, even though it wasn't officially in my country yet, but I had to stay home for about a week. Technically, we were only allowed 3 unpaid sick days all year, so yes, that week was unpaid. A few weeks later, I was still feeling rough, so I made an appointment to see a doctor. Unfortunately, the doctor's office was only open during my work hours, so I let my boss know that I would need to take a slightly longer lunch that day so I could go to my appointment. Shortly after, the HR lady asked me into her office and told me that I was missing too much work and that if I missed any more, I would be disciplined. Confused, I asked her if she was trying to tell me that I was supposed to come into work when I was sick and that I couldn't go to my doctor's appointment. She just smiled and repeated that if I missed any more work, I'd be disciplined. I called my doctor and told them that HR was not allowing me to go to the appointment, and they were appalled, but canceled it for me. A few months later, I came down with a nasty flu, but I went into work every day. A few coworkers told me I looked awful and that I should have stayed home, and I made sure to tell them that HR had made it clear to me that I had to come into work if I was sick. Within the next few days, a bunch of other people ended up homesick. Eventually, the HR lady popped in and told me I looked awful and should have stayed home. When I reminded her of our little talk, she got huffy and left. I still have no idea what the F she expected of me. Story number 73. I had to sue my insurer for denying a health insurance claim for fraudulent reasons. The denial was for an experimental procedure, except that procedure was not performed, and the surgeon specifically called out on noted that he did not perform it in his surgical summary. No billing codes for that procedure were included on the claim sent to the insurer. And when I asked for a copy of the plan, the complete plan, not just the summary they provided during enrollment, she stated she only has a copy from 3 years ago. Our healthcare plan was one that fell under the ERISA guidelines, which incidentally call for a copy of that master plan to be kept on file, or face Uptown a $750 fine per day. So the HR generalist admits in writing to violating federal law to the tune of $800,000. My attorney was very happy to see a copy of that email. After that email, that HR generalist was no longer allowed to correspond with me on this issue. Shocking. And as soon as notice of counsel was served to my employer, who just so happened to self-insure, the claim was approved. My severance when I was laid off was the same as the cost of the attorney. The universe enjoys irony. Well, folks, I have to once again say that as somebody who has not worked in a corporate office or anything like that in his lifetime, I'm glad that I got to experience the culture, learn a little bit more about HR, and I'm able to say that I hate them without ever having experienced them. I think that is something very impressive and also something very horrible, and it feels like the only people who can combat HR are lawyers or level 10 Karens, who are probably working at HR. But it is very unfortunate that these people had to deal with HR just ruining their lives or their careers or at least their Mondays in just some capacity and endure these, as I mentioned before, abusive type relationships. But here's what you can do. Quit, plant evidence, pipe bomb, that's a joke, snitch, secretly record things, I don't know, anything that screws over HR, I'll probably approve of it. Anyway, guys, we are at the end of the video. Thank you all so much for watching. Have a really good day, and